Anatomy of a Deep State. It was written by Mike Lofgren. He was a 28-year insider in Washington, D.C., specializing in national security. And at first it seemed like the article was quite explosive. It was followed up by a PBS interview with Bill Moyers. And largely we can say it didn't go anywhere in terms of the public consciousness, or certainly in terms of academia. I'm going to discuss a little bit about what the article said, but essentially I want you to actually read the article and then address the questions that I've posed for today. So Mr. Lofgren essentially says that when you go to Washington, D.C., there's the visible government that you see, the government that you hear about in college classrooms and political science classes, the government that you see on television, and then there's what he calls the deep state, and suggests that's the real government. He breaks it down so it works essentially like this. It's not every piece of government in the United States, but it is the core parts of the government, especially the federal government, the branches that we think of, the executive, the judicial, the congressional branch, law enforcement, national security, the essential and core pieces of all those federal branches, and then the connections to the state level of government as well. And I think if I were going to suss this up, Mr. Lofgren would say that there's two essential nodes. There is the security, the national security apparatus in Washington, D.C., and the Wall Street piece over here. And there is a relationship from the two that he leaves somewhat undefined. But all other pieces of the deep state consist around this core relationship between the national security apparatus and Wall Street. So the questions that I have for you today are, number one, why an article that was seemingly so explosive, that questioned the very idea of politics that we see before us, that really questioned the fundamental assumptions of political science as it's taught to us in our colleges and universities, why this didn't make more headway. There could be a number of reasons, but bear in mind, if you look at the article, the PBS article, it's followed through with a number of sort of PBS go-to talking heads, a number of them that kind of just say, of course there's a deep state. Like, take it for granted. So if it's sort of an assumed phenomena, why didn't PBS itself follow through? Why didn't it make it into mainstream news? Why is it still not discussed in colleges and universities? What did happen in the spring of 2017 is the deep state as a term made it into the mainstream news. It didn't make it into the news in any kind of way that was definable or that is referred to with any sense of consensus, but it did make it. So I don't know if there's a connection. The sort of seeds were planted back then, and sort of it was made manifest in 2017. That's something we could figure out. We can trace any kind of developments between 2014 and 2017. More recently, the Secretary of State Tillerson suggests that the seventh floor of the State Department is sort of this elite shadow government, something that would be unthinkable to speak about even a year or two ago, that there's sort of this seventh floor deep state. And is this the same deep state that Lofgren is referring to? And if so, finally, what is that connection between that security apparatus in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street? So start out, I would suggest, with this fundamental idea of why it was an idea perhaps whose time had not come for this to make more headway, as it were. And finally, the more difficult part of this that you'd need to kind of dig into, and perhaps a work from some speculation. What is that connection between Wall Street and the national security apparatus? And of course, that's a core question we're going to be dealing with throughout the course. So until next time, thank you for joining Dr. Deep State, and I look forward to your thoughtful comments and discussion in our comments section. Thanks.